If I had my way, everything would be so nice. This world would be like Paris. No, it would be a paradise. No one would ever have to say, I'm gonna get my wish someday. All one would have to do is say, this is my order, if you may.
Welcome to another episode of The School Without Walls. I am the founder and host of this educational program called The School Without Walls. It so happened this is the month of February, and we are nationally celebrating Black History Month, although I don't like the term celebrating, but we are we are talking about the achievements of African Americans. My guest today is my pastor, the Reverend Alvin Smith. I'm going to introduce him in a few minutes, but I want to mention some things prior to that. For example, the Dr. Carter G. Woodson is a very important person that we want all of us to be mindful of, and he's the author of a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. And it should be the primer of the first book, I would say, for any aspiring African American who wants to know more about his people and have a better understanding of why we haven't made more progress. Pastor Smith, before we finish, let us discuss a little bit about Negro, the origin of Negro, the origin of color, and of course, we finally Black and then African American. Before we finish, let's go through that. But tell us a little bit about your pedigree, where you were born and so forth, and how you arrived here and so forth. Mm-hmm.
I was originally born in Los Angeles, California, and grew up there, a PK, preacher's kid.
Preacher's kid, okay.
And grew up in a church by the name of First A.M.E. Church there in Los Angeles.
I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, and Bishop H. Brookins was my childhood pastor. And Reverend Cecil Murray, I answered my call in ministry. So my heart and my passion has been church and community, because that's what I saw before me as a child growing up. I was educated there in the schools of Wilberforce University. From there, did not finish to Azusa Pacific. Was there at USC for a while, but I graduated from Azusa Pacific. Went on
that's in California.
That's in California. And went on to seminary at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta. And that's where I got a chance to see and meet my bishop, Bishop Samuel Green, and so happy to be a part of the 12th Episcopal District with Bishop Samuel Green.
Was he in school there? Or
he was a student, and now his brother is the dean of the seminary.
He sure is. I see. Now let me ask you this about California. Was that anywhere in the Watts area where you were raised? I'm
proud to say that I was born in a place called Compton, California.
Okay.
And so in the heart of the Watts area, we left about when I was 3 years of age, but baptized in a church by the name of Grant A.M.E. And my grandfather spent over 75 years in the A.M.E. church as a pastor.
Your grandfather?
My grandfather.
Was your father also a pastor?
My father was a pastor, but outside of the A.M.E. church.
Oh, he was not an A.M.E.
Right.
So he never was A.M.E.
No. Well, he had formerly been A.M.E., and when he answered his call, my mother and he had already divorced.
I see. Okay, thank you for that information. Now you're here with us. You came from the 5th District, right?
I came from the 5th District.
That's a large district.
It is.
Give us somewhat of the boundaries, like some of the major cities. I know it's in the state of California, right?
We cover, we covered about 16 states.
Boy.
From California to state of Washington, Montana,
right.
Idaho,
Alaska,
Colorado, Alaska,
right.
Wyoming, just to name a few. Missouri, where I served, and 9 years in St. Louis and 7 in Kansas City.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why it's so large? Why didn't they make, you think, more than one district? Why is so much territory?
Well, we're the second largest. We were the second largest. I'm now a product of the 12th.
That's in territory, right?
In territory. South Africa being number 1. But opportunity presented itself with Bishop Green to come to the great state of Arkansas and be the pastor of Pine Bluff, and we're so excited about it.
We're certainly glad to have you here, too. I feel that we're going to do some great things. Are there any particular plans you would like to share with the community?
Appreciate it.
Them, anything you want to say?
Well, as a student of ITC there in the AU Center in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the things that always was an interest of mine was college ministry. And so when the opportunity presented itself, and knowing how close the university is here at Pine Bluff to our church, I was delighted. So one of the first things we're going to do right after Resurrection Sunday is establish what we call Wednesday Night Live.
Wednesday Night Live.
Wednesday Night Live.
St. John African Methodist Episcopal Church.
St. John African Methodist, we call it now STJ.
STJ.
STJ. But we're going to have from 5 to 6 a meal for all the students and families of the church. And then from there we go from 6 to 7 to Bible studies. And then we'll go to a 1-hour praise and worship service from 7 to 8 and build a praise band and a praise group that will be singing. And our goal is to utilize some of our college students who are studying to be ministers and integrate that with some of our own ministers like yourself and so forth there on every Wednesday, starting right after Resurrection Sunday.
Is there any particular reason you're waiting to Resurrection Sunday?
I think we have to first be resurrected, and I believe in long-term planning, and so just trying to really plan it so we know that God will get the glory at the end.
The reason I raised that question, I'll mention is Cameron said, I'm so eager to get started. I said, I wonder why is Dr. Hobbs, why is he waiting to after Resurrection Sunday? I said, you asked the wrong person. So now I know planning is important.
Planning is important.
Oh, well, it's about break time. We'll be back right after break, and we're going to talk about Richard Allen, the founder of the church, and Bishop Turner.
Right.
Those are two very significant persons out of our bishops, all right?
Okay.
Have a kit so you're ready for any emergency. Develop a plan for what you and your family will do before disaster strikes. And stay informed during severe weather any way you can. Visit ready.gov for ways to prepare your family for emergencies.
Those of you who've just joined us, I'm Anthony Hobbs, host of this television program called The School Without Walls. My guest is my pastor, the Reverend Alvin Smith. Pastor Smith, we were going to talk about Richard Allen. Give us a little history of that Richard Allen and the African Methodist Episcopal Church. A lot of people do not know what A.M.E. stands for because we seldom articulate the meaning.
Right.
Okay?
Well, I mean, if you can imagine back in 1787,
All right.
there at St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church, the persons of color were at the altar praying and were asked to get up from the altar because African Americans, blacks at that time, Negroes, coloreds, were not allowed to be at the altar. We were to be in the balcony. And so two gentlemen, Absalom Jones, who I believe became the first Episcopalian priest, and Richard Allen, who was the founder of the Free African Society, or the A.M.E. Church, started this movement where they demonstrated and boycotted and just walked out.
That was perhaps the first boycott.
Probably the first boycott within the African American culture. In a blacksmith shop, Richard Allen started the A.M.E. Church, the anvil being his pulpit. There it gave birth. They started as the Free African Society. From that, you had your first black newspaper, the Christian Recorder, which is a nationally acclaimed paper.
And we still have that.
And we still have
today.
the A.M.E. Christian Recorder. Then when you look at universities, they started schools, Wilberforce University being the first historical black college.
Okay.
NAACP started in the basement of an A.M.E. church. So the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop Richard Allen wanted to maintain that sense of identity by who we are, African. But at the same time, like Martin Luther, his heart yearned because he really loved the Methodist Episcopal Church. And so therefore he maintained that African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Right. And I believe that is the only organization, and perhaps the first organization, that maintained African. Whereas I was told from some study that even some of the Baptist churches were once called the African Baptists, but they dropped that completely and just became Baptists. But we have maintained the African, I guess, connection in some sense, and I think that's wonderful.
Well, when you look at it and you think at the times, that was such a bold statement that we would identify of our origin, that we are African, and that we were proud to be from the soil of Africa. The other thing that is key, there has been much controversy saying, well, there were other churches that were established, but they were established by slave owners.
Definitely.
This was the only.
That's key.
This was the only movement that was started by people of color.
Right.
And so the slave master, you know, cleverly would allow them to start their own church, but would frame them or refrain them from learning how to read, because if they read, they would be able to find nuggets of history and liberation that were hidden in those scriptures.
Definitely, definitely. I think that's very important for the public to understand, is that it also explains why most of the South is Baptist. You see, the majority of the people, black or white, are Baptists in the South. And of course, the Eastern churches, we find the Presbyterians and Methodists and all out east and north, and later they came into the South, right? Because the Southern, as I understand it, now you're my pastor, you correct me if I make a mistake on this, but I'm trying to get these scholars, like the founder of the Methodist Church was, what was his name?
John Wesley.
John Wesley.
John Wesley.
Who did not believe in slavery. John Wesley never did believe in slavery. Whereas John Calvin was predestinist in his thinking, and the Baptists bought his philosophy because they could justify enslaving people, because they misconstrued his thinking and said that we are predestined to be drawers of waters and hewers of wood for our brother, and all that kind of mess in the South, right? Well,
somewhat. I mean, when you look at the South, places like South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, the A.M.E. Church is alive and well, and it's a movement that is so strong,
very strong
in those parts of the southern states. Even though the A.M.E. Church started out of Philadelphia, and its strength being in that eastern region with Baltimore and New York, we're still strong all across the world. Africa being one of our fastest growing areas in the A.M.E. Church.
That's today, right?
And that's today. When you look at the legacy of what you have of a Bishop Richard Allen, you have a Bishop Turner, Henry McNeil Turner. A lot of people don't talk about Henry McNeil Turner, but many know about Liberia, West Africa. He really started the Back to Africa movement before Marcus Garvey even came on the scene.
Is that right?
He's responsible for the settlement of what we now call Liberia, West Africa. Bishop Turner had the audacity to say back then, he said, God must be a black man. Who better to understand our sorrows and our concerns? So a very bold statement for a person of color of that day.
At that day, yeah.
Then you had Bishop Daniel Payne, who was very much responsible for the education in the A.M.E. Church. And so those individuals made so many huge contributions, not only to the A.M.E. Church, but to African American culture as it is.
Right. Now, I think we had as many as 11 schools, didn't we? Once at one point, 11 schools, colleges. Yeah.
11 major, matter of fact, as you count, over 15 universities. You have, the wonderful Shorter College there in Little Rock.
Used to be a 4-year, I understand.
Used to be 4-year, but I applaud. It's a 2-year school because sometimes you have to lay a foundation in preparing those students for that 4-year journey.
Right.
And Bishop Green is doing a phenomenal job with the college, and we're excited about the enrollment. But the contribution of historically black colleges is so key to today's society. And shame on a parent and shame on a young person who happens to be a person of color and says that they don't think that they need those type of schools because they're antiquated. I said because half of our leaders have been birthed from historically black institutions.
Definitely, definitely. We're going to have to break on that. We'll be back in just a few minutes. But let me say this before the break. The president also is named Green, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
What is his first name? I know he's an attorney. Green is the president of Shorter College, and the bishop, who's the chairman of the board, is a Green. No relationship, I understand. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Those of you who have just joined us, I'm Anthony O. Hobbs, host and producer of this TV program called The School Without Walls. My guest is my pastor, the Reverend Alvin Smith. Now, with Reverend Smith, before we continue with our conversation, I want to acknowledge this youth director. This is being directed by Miss Kendra Cole. She's a graduating biology major here at the University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, and we're wishing her well in this endeavor. And also, I've had some student guests. I want to mention their names. Latrice Smith, a graduating senior, majoring in computer science, also a student of mine. Latrice Burns, a graduating senior, human development and family studies. The third person is Charisma Finch, senior, human development and family studies, and we have, Sykes. Oh, Sykes, I have a problem with that first name. Chachina Sykes, sophomore, social work. All these students were with me in the studio today, and we're glad to have them to be involved. Now, Pastor Smith, you were several things you said you would talk about in the next few minutes. You want to start with this baby situation where you said the baby was slapped?
No, I just want to, say the importance of maintaining our culture. Sometimes people ask the question, they say, oh, so you are not Christian because you're caught up into black culture. Well, we're first Christians. We believe in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, and we believe in the resurrection, but we also believe in identity. And the concern that I have today is that our culture is just moving so mainstream that we're losing a sense of identity. Just recently, a baby on a flight was slapped and called the N-word, or the word nigger, was used. And the baby was adopted. That was neither here nor there. But here we are in 2013. Now, they went on and said that the man had had too many drinks. He was immediately fired. But that's why
he was an employee of the...
No, he was an employee of an aerospace industry and pretty high up, but he was immediately fired.
Oh, I see.
But that's why we have to have the A.M.E. church. That's why we have to have a Dr. Hobbs. That's why we have to have a University of Pine Bluff. That's why we have to have a Shorter College. That's why we have to have, a Wilberforce University, because it's not over. If you look at this president and you see the disrespect
My God.
Any other country, any person in his cabinet that would have stood and said you're a liar
Right.
would have been probably beheaded in a foreign country.
Definitely.
And when you have military officers who refuse to serve and refuse their orders, and they're not put in a military brig, and they're not stripped of their rank, shows overt racism.
Right.
And so I say, if we ever needed the Lord before, we sure do need him now. We have made many advances, but at the same time, we're just not where we think we are.
Definitely. Now, tell me about this slapping of the baby now. What age baby is it? Just a little infant?
This was
And why did he slap the baby?
the baby was crying.
Oh, the baby was aggravating him. I
The
see.
baby allegedly was aggravating him, and so he whispered in the mother's ear, and then when she sort of chastised him, he slapped the child. And the article says on the internet that there were bruises and possible scars. I mean, but here we are in 2013, and I don't care what color the child was. You know, everyone with common sense knows that when you fly, it automatically has problems with, you know, especially an infant, with their hearing.
Right.
And
Even
so
young children, they're going to be talking too loudly and all this
exactly.
thing, but you got to tolerate it.
You've got to tolerate it. But God knows that, as I said before, we've made advances, but we're just not as free as we think we are.
Right, right. Now, back to identity, what are some other reasons why you think that we need to maintain an African connection, an African identity, African Americans? What are the reasons?
Well, I believe that identity is so important. I look at America and I think about it and I say, well, Jewish persons express themselves and say they're Jewish Americans.
Definitely, that's right.
Irish say that they're Irish Americans. Mexican Americans, they call themselves Mexican Americans.
Right.
Or Spanish descent. I said, you know, we're the only culture that has been told to lose our sense of identity. And our identity is who we are, and we always have to be aware of who we are, whose we are, and where we are.
That is very, very true. I consider that as, I call it the damages of the slave institution. Like, so it seemed to me that the system was designed to make us as invisible as possible worldwide.
Right.
And they did it. They were successful for a while. But at this point, with the news, media, television, and all, it just cannot be anymore. So it's important for us to understand what you're saying. So we're nearing the conclusion, and I was talking to some students the other day. Do you know that the students, the age of the young lady here, many of them do not know that we were once called Negroes? They don't have any clue. And I think that's our fault as adults. And also they don't have any concept of the word color. So I want to run through that in a few minutes. But before we do that, I want to say to the pastors that's under the sound of my voice, we're encouraging you to use your educational building. Most of them don't use them anymore. You know, they don't use them. Use we have prepared teachers and so forth, and history is so important, and there's nothing wrong with teaching history. We need to know our history. So we want to go beyond just a month. We want to go beyond the month. We want to continue talking about the achievements of our people. As I was saying to my pastor, I was talking to my class about, we were once called Negro, and I asked them, did they understand it? Half of the students did not understand why we were called Negro, so I explained that to them. I said, now, I happen to have been a part of the generation that was in that changing part of that, you see. I grew up called a Negro, and some of us were called colored.
Colored.
And the colored was simply the offspring between mainly the white man and a black woman. That was the colored people, which actually treated a little bit, they were a little differently, more or less the house boys. We call them the house Negroes, okay? For the lack of what we used to call them, house Negroes. And then we had the darker ones in the field. and that was designed for the ones that got the crumbs to keep the ones down. And thanks be to God, during the Civil Rights Movement, we sort of came together and realized that we were all in the same boat, right?
You're absolutely correct. And there was a gentleman by the name of Willie Lynch that wrote a book. It was a manual of how to maintain your slave.
Go ahead.
And what you just said is what he had in that book, about how they would play divide and conquer, how they would separate them by color, how he would come in and force that black woman to hate that black man, or that black man to hate that black woman, how they would come in and infiltrate their children in terms of their thinking. And when you mention Carter G. Woodson in The Miseducation of the Negro, he more or less gave us a prophecy because he warned us, just like W.B. Du Bois. They warned us about where we are today.
I see.
The other day I was in California visiting the wife, and a lady was at a light, and she had one of these little, I guess, Pomeranian, puppies, and she's holding the dog, driving the car, and they're kissing in the mouth.
Oh my God. That I have never understood about European Americans and adults.
This was a sister.
Oh my.
This was a sister who gravitated because of what she saw on television. This is how we express ourselves now.
That is sad, because I have never had the opportunity to ask a white person about that aspect of the culture, but I wondered, on television I've seen them kissing dogs. And my principal taught us, say, you have to be careful when you play with a dog, because it would lick you in the mouth, in the face. And I just don't understand it. And you say a sister's doing it. That is really sad.
I'm giving that example of how we break our necks to try to blend into what we call mainstream. But I want to commend the chancellor here, because he had a meeting with ministers, and here this university is really branching out, trying to reach out into the community with pastors. Those are those type of bridges that we need to build. I know our bishop is working hard, with our denomination. He is now the president of the Bishops' Council, and he's trying to get the denomination to move forward and broaden our vision. And we've got to do that, but we can never forget who we are.
No, we cannot do that. We have about how many more minutes? This time is up. I believe she's saying the time is up. Is that what you're saying? So we're going to stop on this. Again, Pastor, glad to have you.
Thank you.